What's up, everybody? My name's Crunchy Frog, and I'm here to give you guys a good old gameplay commentary. For any of you that have known me in the past, you know that about 10 years ago, I tried this whole thing when I was a lot less, well spoken as I am nowadays, and with the voice of a 13-year-old. I figured I'd give it back another run through here and really just give some thoughts on the recent COD landscape and a couple of other games. I plan on putting out a whole series like this on the channel going forward. Basically, giving my thoughts on recent gaming happenings and especially within the Call of Duty and Forza franchises. Basically, I've been hearing a lot of talk recently within the community, just in regards to feeling that Vanguard was a massive flop, especially as compared to Modern Warfare and Cold War before it. You often hear that Modern Warfare was kind of a resurgence in COD, especially when Warzone dropped. But now it feels like we're almost at a low point with Call of Duty Vanguard, and some people have attributed it to the fact that it's a World War II shooter. But I truly don't think that's the case. I think that the game just feels like it has no identity. I don't think gamers are necessarily tired of the World War II setting. I just feel the Vanguard didn't do it correctly, didn't do it justice. I think there's still a lot of room to be had in the World War II shooter genre, and a lot of great stories to tell and a lot of great games to build. But Call of Duty Vanguard just fumbled the bag entirely. And I feel like it just feels lifeless and almost like a corporate shell of former Call of Duty games. And I know this has kind of been a trend that's been happening for the last several years, as microtransactions and profits have kind of invaded the gaming landscape more and more year over year. But I truly believe that Vanguard is kind of the culmination of that. The game is now just a money-making vessel instead of a work of art. And that's not to belittle the developers or, anyone who's done work on this game per se, but definitely feels like that's not the point anymore. You could tell several years ago that they started out wanting to make a great product, and along the way, if they made money, great. There's always some concessions here and there, especially when loot box got added and stuff like that. But more and more as every game comes out, you can tell that ratio is quickly slipping, and that the Activision executives and the money makers are making more decisions than the average Joe that really wants to just create a great game. Just to kind of get back to it again, I want to go through this game or through this video and state why this game just feels kind of lifeless, and kind of prove the point that it's not World War II that's dragging this game down, but rather how they failed to do World War II correctly. If you stick through the video and you like what you hear, please be sure to like and subscribe. And as always, leave a comment below, your thoughts on the matter. Would you like to see another World War II game done correctly in the COD franchise, or just as a whole going forward? Or you kind of played out with it, even if they created the best World War II game ever, would you still play it or not? Without further ado, we'll get right into it. I wanted to start off by saying, kind of delving into what makes World War II games so great and why they succeeded for so long, and really they continue to be made, obviously, even up until 2021 with Vanguard, as well as several indie projects, that are going on right now, shooters that, again, are still set in that same theater. Obviously the setting differentiates it heavily from other shooter games by default. It's built to feel different because it was entirely different, section of history, an entirely different era. And so the games typically feel a lot better. So in long-running franchises, especially Call of Duty, you can throw in a World War II game because it's kind of meant to feel different, right? It's not meant to feel, Battlefield 5 wasn't meant to feel like Battlefield 3 or 4. And so that's what makes these games so great, is they stand apart from the rest. And I kind of touched on it earlier, but the period in history, right, World War II, the early 1940s, is just so vastly different from the landscape that we're used to now, especially the average gamer age, right? Typically we don't see World War II survivors or their age demographic playing these video games, right? So to everyone that's really into them and the audience that the developers are trying for, this is a totally alien landscape, right? Especially in terms of, you know, the geopolitical landscape at the time, and just kind of how history was. It's a vast departure. So it's definitely interesting to dive in. And I'm a history nerd myself. So personally, for me, it's something that, I feel is cool to visit. And again, obviously modern conflicts are cool, but it's really nice to travel back in time and look around and see, what guns are different, and, just everything about the environment. Um, it also gives developers a unique way to adjust gameplay to compensate for the lack of technology, right? So in modern games, we have a bunch of attachments on weapons. Um, Vanguard notwithstanding, we'll get back to that, but so the guns perform a little better, right? We've come very far in terms of weapon technology. So things like kill streaks or vehicles are vastly different. Landscapes, you're not going to fight in a 54-story skyscraper, glass skyscraper if it's set in World War II, right? You're going to be in a little more gritty situations, older architecture, the vast battlefields that World War II encompassed, as opposed to kind of modern combat. So it again, it goes back to my first point of it gives a really differentiated experience. And to me, that's what makes the games great. And there's also the option to kind of ground it and make it more serious, right? You see so many games, either modern or futuristic, that kind of jump the shark, so to speak, right? They have crazy microtransactions and visuals. They can kind of make up technology. Things like Black Ops 2 had like the millimeter scanner sight, which you could see through buildings, and stuff like that. And that's great and fun, but I feel like creating a World War II entry in a long-running franchise gives you that chance to kind of ground it and bring it back home to a more gritty and realistic standpoint, a more somber and sober feel to the games overall. And because of that, you might even be able to gain more emotional, interaction with your user base, right? People are going to feel it tug on their heartstrings a little bit, as opposed to a conflict, in 2035 that never happened and probably will never happen. You get to impress upon these people that these events did happen. People died. People suffered. This is something that you should be taking seriously. Not that people, shouldn't take war seriously in general, but trying to convince people to take World War II seriously is a lot easier than trying to convince them to take the Human Covenant War seriously in Halo. Obviously, it tends to add a whole nother dimension to your games when you can kind of bring in that emotional interactivity. And so, to me, the last truly great World War II game that Call of Duty has produced was not World War II, believe it or not. I liked the game and I enjoyed the game, but we're not really going to discuss that in this video. I want to touch more on the last one, which was World at War, and why that was so great, and how Vanguard is such a vast departure from that. It's kind of crazy, right? So to start off, in 2007, Call of Duty 4 came out and totally changed the gaming landscape, right? It was modern combat, which Call of Duty had never seen. It had always been World War II conflicts. But now it shifted into the modern era. So again, everything that comes along with that, a different feel, the guns, play differently. Technology has advanced to, at that time, I think COD 4 took place in a fictional 2011. So, everything had been crafted very much so to feel modern. The heads-up display, even down to some of the voice acting, there's a lot more modern slang, and, kind of voice inflections and everything like that you see in modern times. And so whenever that came out in 2007, and everybody had kind of gotten used to how COD 4 felt and that modern feel, they released World at War in 2008, and it just felt completely different. And it had its own ambiance and feel that you didn't get with Call of Duty 4. And that's kind of what made it great at the time, because you could play World at War and go back to your dashboard and load up COD 4, and you felt like you were playing two completely different experiences. They each hit differently, even though they were functionally almost the exact same game in terms of engine and everything like that. Obviously, small tweaks here and there. but by and large, right, they weren't too crazy different from each other, um, in the bones of the whole operation, but they felt like they could not be, more different at its core. And, different things that made World War so great was just you felt like it was a special experience. The factions and multiplayer really kind of brought home a sense of camaraderie and teamwork. As dumb as it sounds, like the victory songs for the different factions, like especially like the Red Army, I know everyone talks about on YouTube and otherwise. Um, it just felt like you were there. It seemed like everything that they crafted in that game, they tried to draw you in and feel like you were in World War II, and this was different, right? There wasn't, grand marching songs being played through crackly loudspeaker, audio overlays in Call of Duty 4. You wouldn't hear the same kind of battle cries and everything like that in a modern shooter that you were, seeing in World of War. So it started to craft two very different experiences and put you in the seat of World War II, where COD 4 did such a good job of making you feel like you were in a modern combat zone. So, it established, it got the player so much more involved, and especially involved in that setting. Again, there's the historical content to immerse you. So there were actual real world events that you could relate to and learn more about. The cutscenes, I remember being fantastic at that. It felt like you were in a History Channel documentary. Um, and there was things that you could relate to and you can learn more about. Maybe you had family members in the conflict or affected by the conflict, and you could really immerse yourself in. Whereas COD 4 was, again, a fictional, war, something that had its own merits, but it just created such a sense of fun and immersion that you really don't see anymore, unfortunately, in COD. And also, they went with the darkest and most serious tone possible. Like, it is insane to see the two beside one another. Of a modern game, Call of Duty game with like anime kitty girls running around versus the kind of bone chilling menu music and overall soundtrack and vibe of World of War, right? They weren't going to gloss over the fact you were in the deadliest, conflict in human history, and they wanted to tell that story. Again, even down to some of the menu, sounds like when you would click something and the just kind of weird chanting music that was played over the menus and everything, like from start to finish, from the moment you loaded up the game until the moment you hit 10th prestige, you felt kind of uneasy, and you were meant to. Playing through the campaign, obviously a very visceral, gory campaign, something that was meant to tug at your heartstrings, meant to make you feel something um, that really you don't see in a modern Call of Duty game at all. Um, and and again, all of these elements came together because they wanted to craft something that felt wholly different than Call of Duty 4. So when you were playing World of War, you knew you were playing a different experience. Treyarch had built this game. You were not playing the Infinity Ward game. Yes, a game just came out last year, but guess what? It's a completely different game. And as you'll hear about later, Vanguard does the exact opposite of that. In almost every respect it possibly can. Instead of trying to differentiate from, Modern Warfare or Cold War, it really just tries to be like the younger brother that copies everything their older brother does, and fails at almost every point. Um, and so, to kind of branch off of that, Vanguard breaks from that in that a lot of the game is just Modern Warfare systems and gameplay principles, but like loosely coded in a weird World War II cosmetic. But as we'll get to later, it's not even an authentic World War II experience. So you had COD 4 and World at War. We talked about those being basically the same game, again, down to the create a class and the plus 10 points for a kill and everything like that. There wasn't crazy innovation between 2007's entry and 2008, but they crafted the game such that they were wholly different experiences. Vanguard rather, just took the bones that worked for Modern Warfare and said, okay, well now instead of the M4, you're going to use the STG-44. And that's the only difference. The vibe is still kind of not that serious. um, Yeah, and again, we'll get to, talking about the skins and kind of the crazy stuff later, but it, as a whole, it doesn't feel like they tried to change anything. They just ran out of settings to use, and they said, well, we haven't touched World of War or World War II in a couple years. We might as well kind of make it World War II like. But once they got down to the bones of it, they realized that they couldn't port it over. And so instead of trying to change things to better fit the setting and the narrative and the feel that they could have crafted, they just stretched history to fit instead, which didn't really work. Um, you know, World of War only brought over parts that fit its narrative, fit its story. And they sacrifice things like weapon camos, even though those are in the game files. I understand, but they sacrificed a lot of Call of Duty 4 because it just wouldn't work in their game, right? They took more of a hardline stance on that, and said, no, this wouldn't work. This is a World War II shooter. We can't do this. What elements can we take that worked from last year without kind of bastardizing, for lack of a better term, our World War II experience rather. Whereas Vanguard just doesn't care. It stretches history in whatever horrible ways it deems fit in order to make it work. The higher ups at Activision said we need to sell, X amount of copies. We need to have X amount of users on every day. We need this worked. They probably have some crazy statistics and metrics that they try to live up to. And instead of Sledgehammer saying, well, no, 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 this, we're crafting a World War II game. It's supposed to feel different. It's supposed to invoke, feelings in a player that's different than that of Modern Warfare or even Cold War. They just kind of laid down and said, okay, yeah, you want a gunsmith? We'll make it even worse. We'll add 10 attachments. Nobody along the line seemed to say, well, we can't do that. Guns at best maybe had one rudimentary attachment, barely customized in World War II, right? Nobody had time to sit there and handcraft weapons or spray paint them pretty colors and everything. No one at any point stopped to say that. They just, hey, we have to, fill out these special principles that Modern Warfare kind of started with, and history's just going to do whatever we tell it to. We'll get into, how how crazily historically inaccurate it is because of that. But the game is also mostly built around systems that just encourage spending money instead of having fun. And back in the day, again, you saw it was more, hey, let's make a great product. It's gonna sell like hotcakes. It's gonna make us money. And nowadays, it's just how many ways can we fit money in there and then disguise it as a game? And you've probably heard that a lot, but when you start to do that, you lose your originality between titles because every title is trying to do the same thing. Every title has, now they have like synchronized level systems and synchronized battle passes, and with Warzone, even more so. They're trying to make every game the same. But the issue when you try to make every game the same is they all lose their identity and nothing feels worth playing. And I think that's why a lot of people are burnt out on Vanguard only, halfway through its life cycle. A little over now. We're a little bit through the summer. So, but you get my point. It's totally different. It kind of ruins people's feels because they've been playing the same game now for 3 years, for lack of a better term. And yes, I know there's differences between the two, or three rather, but in essence, because of these changes that I believe Activision executives have kind of put forth, they feel like the same game every year, and it loses its identity. And kind of the title of this video, how did Vanguard lose its identity? It doesn't have one. It never had one. It was always a Modern Warfare game that they just wanted to kind of say looked like World War II, just because that was like, hey, it's a new time period. We can call it different. The only thing they could have done otherwise is maybe gone to the future, which people would not have liked. And again, because of all this, it starts to feel like a really lifeless and soulless experience that's only there to take your money. It stops feeling more like a handcrafted, polished game every year, and more so a different machine for you to put your credit card info into. And again, that strips even further identity away. It's one thing when a game is good, but it also encourages you to spend money, but it's another thing for a game solely to take your money, and hopefully it's good enough that you don't complain enough to stop playing. and it feels like Vanguard is wholly in the latter category. Um, and because of this, because they're just so worried about making money and making a game that feels like the other game because the other game made money, they've lost everything that makes a World War II game fun to play. And so I think that's why people are so sick and tired of it now, is because all of the reasons that they had to like a World War II game are gone. So instead, they only see the parts of the World War II experience that kind of drag it down. Um, you know what I mean? Like all the reasons that made a World War II game special and worth playing and worth the sacrifices of modern combat and its you know fun perks, if you'll say that, are gone. Every gun has 10 attachments, which we'll get into a little bit probably later. But every gun, it doesn't feel like a World War II gun. The maps kind of feel like World War II, but not really. The operators certainly don't. I mean, we have a guy in a literal like EDM electric face like skull mask now, and it's like LEDs. I can't say for certain because I was not alive back then, but I'm pretty certain that LEDs were not around in, in the early 40s. You'll have to fact check me on that, but I'm pretty certain on this one. It just stops feeling like a World War II experience and just feels like they had to slap some World War II guns in there just to mix it up from their already vast library of 80s and 90s guns and, 2000s and beyond guns that they've had in the previous two games. And because of that, it removes all of the weight and impact, and it kind of makes it a joke. I'm not one to get offended over stuff or anything along those lines, but it does almost seem like they're almost making a joke out of this, right? We have this horrible, serious conflict. What, 60 million people, something like that, perished in the conflict, and one of the darkest periods of human history, and instead they're using it to sell anime cat girl skins. It just feels like they, again, just took it and just ran it through the mud just to make some more money. And not that every game has to be this like somber gravestone of the horrible things that have happened in World War II, but you have to at least be a little more respectful to the source material, I would hope, such that it's not just a blatant ploy for money. And that all breaks immersion. We talked about with World of War, one of the reasons it was so great is because it was so immersive. The brutal campaign, some of the cinematics that you saw there brought you into the game. They made you, enact choices that you felt kind of bad, if you killed a surrendering soldier or if you put them out of their misery in some of the levels, stuff like that. It brought you into the game. The menu music, I mean, you ask anyone about the menu music in World of War and they'll tell you. But this game has none of that. Nothing brings you into the game. Nothing keeps you into the game. You don't feel like you're in battle. You don't feel like you're in World War II. I haven't played through the whole campaign, but the about half, 60% of it that I did play, I didn't feel immersed at all. Again, it was just kind of off the wall crazy stuff that they tried. So, and the campaign was fairly good and it's gotten good reviews. So that tells you something. Even a decent part of the game is just not on brand for what it should be. And instead of not shying away from the pain of history and trying to teach lessons and trying to immerse the player, it just tries to appease everyone. And so we have all kinds of crazy operators that would have never fought in the war, never been anywhere close to the war, but we have to put them in there to make money and to appease people. You know, guns that, again, no one, everyone would cry if their gun only had one attachment again and it was a bayonet. So in order to appease those people and bring it up to the quote unquote standards of modern warfare, every gun gets 10 attachments now. Even the M1 Garand with a drum magazine, which for those of you who know how that weapon works, it's physically impossible. And that's probably the least egregious example. If we were to get a firearms expert in here, it's just they did things just to appease everyone, and they didn't use any of those things that make a World War II shooter feel realistic or fun or different from other games. They just said, no, we can't do that. Somebody would be mad. And the issue with setting a game in this time period is stuff like kill streaks and other vehicle technology aren't quite up to date, but it's kind of half baked. They didn't go the whole way back and use authentic things that you would see in World War II. 100%. They just reskinned stuff that was in Modern Warfare and tried to make it work, but it's not fully committed to. So instead, you have blander kill streaks, but nothing more to grab your attention because nothing's fully committed to. It's like a weird middle road between, well, we have to scale back the technology because this is 80 years ago, but also we have to pretend it's new technology so that people feel at home with it compared to Modern Warfare. I'm not really sure. Um, and because they refuse to commit one direction or the other, they're in kind of a weird gray middle area where you're just hamstrung by the limitations of the time period sometimes, but other times you're never fully committed to the time period. So you're breaking, you know, history and you're breaking immersion and everything the rest of the time. There's never any commitment. It was just like the most boilerplate gray area game that they could so that nobody would be overtly angry or opposed to things and it would sell the most copies and make the most microtransactions. Um, and it's unfortunate, you know. And so all of these points come together, in kind of summary of all this. All these points come together to neutralize the point of making a World War II shooter, right? If you're going to make a World War II shooter, you want to make one that is different, right? That feels vastly different than the last game you put out. It should be a whole experience, more somber tone, force players to get good, for lack of a better term, with the technology of that era, stuff like that. And if you neutralize all those facts, then you're not really making a World War II shooter, and it just feels like a more bland Modern Warfare. You have people saying, well, I wish they would have just kept it modern, because then at least you can experiment a little bit and things feel a little more realistic if you have pink camo on a gun, right? You can physically go to Dick's or something like that in sporting goods and see pink guns, stuff like that. Like, if you compromise on all the things that make a World War II shooter great, you're just making a bland game that people are going to hate because it doesn't have the technical achievements of modern warfare games or future warfare games. And I kind of used the example with my friend the other day of, it's kind of like taking all of the ingredients off of an Italian hoagie except for the cheese, and then you sell it still calling it an Italian hoagie, but really it's just cheese. You've taken away all the elements that make it unique and that make people want to get into it and have a great experience in that. But you keep one element and think that that's enough to differentiate it from the other games. So it just leads to the game feeling really lifeless and a lot of people kind of becoming disenfranchised with it. So, again, in conclusion, to kind of wrap this up, I know I've been ranting and it is a long video, so I appreciate, all you guys who've stuck around, but, the game just feels soulless because it lacks any of the defining characteristics of a World War II shooter, but they also held enough back that it's not as exciting or new and flashy as a Modern Warfare game. And it just feels like they took Modern Warfare, which worked for a lot of people, and just hastily, slapped a World War II cover over it. And in doing so, it just feels like the same game we've been playing for 3 years. And I know people make that comment about COD all the time, but even more so these last 3 years. It has been an identical game, just with different skins, sadly. And, so anything that would have made it feel special and would have warranted us going back to World War II just is kind of left out in the dust. And honestly, I think it's going to hurt people's opinions of World War II games going forward. And it might hurt their ability to go back and truly create a great story in that time period, in the same vein of World at War, a game which I think did it incredibly, and a game which really knew what it was trying to do and did it well. So yeah, other than that, I appreciate you guys for coming out today. I might do some similar videos in the future that kind of break down some of this a little more often, and kind of go more in depth. But other than that, just wanted to give my thoughts on why I felt this game feels kind of soulless and, hopefully they get it together, and I'm really hoping for Modern Warfare 2. But yeah, so other than that, if you feel like sticking around and hearing more of these type commentaries and thought pieces, as well as live stream clips, I'm going to be doing some Let's Plays. Please hit that like button and subscribe. And yeah, drop a comment below on your thoughts on the matter and what Activision and Infinity Ward can do for you this fall that will drag you back from the down point of Vanguard to make you really excited for Modern Warfare 2. So other than that, guys, my name's AJ. You can also call me Crunchy Frog, and I'm out. Peace.